Today I'm going to talk a little bit about the State Cable Act, the Telecom Act as well. They were both adopted in 2008 by the Georgia legislature and has been in place since that time. Also going to talk a little bit about small cell, and then we're going to talk about using city and county assets such as public land and water tank towers to attach equipment or erect towers on public land. Talk a little bit about that as well. EMCs, electric membership co-ops, and talk a little bit about 911 collections. And so we're going to kind of cover a wide gamut here. And I hope that you'll be able to take home some ideas or some ability to enhance your revenue for your local government from this meeting. But starting off with cable. Cable Act was again adopted in 2008, and basically what it set up in our state was cable operators, they must, if they're going to provide video services, they cannot operate in your right-of-way without having a franchise. But in Georgia, a cable operator can elect to either have a state franchise issued by the state through the Secretary of State's office or a local franchise. Almost every cable operator in the state, with the exception of Comcast, elects to go through a state franchise. Comcast, for some reason, I have some ideas, but it'd be better for them to explain their reasoning. They elect to have about half of their franchises in the state is local, and that's mainly in the Atlanta area. And then everywhere else throughout the state, they are generally under a state franchise. The thing from a revenue standpoint to realize is that it still follows federal law. Since 1984, local governments can charge up to a 5% franchise fee of the cable operator's gross revenue. That's gross revenue derived from the operation of this cable system in your jurisdiction. And that is from video services, not voice over IP, not internet services, just strictly video. And so they are required to pay you the 5% on gross revenue. A local government, we still have a few in the state that are charging less than 5%. Prior to 1984, it was 3%. We have some governments that still charge 3%. Those governments, I think I will always have job security as long as they're at 3%, because I can continue to try to urge them to go to 5%. And we were successful the other day in Alpharetta finally going to 5%. But to show you the value of that, this city, by implementing and changing the franchise fee from 3% to 5%, they will now receive an additional $400,000 a year from AT&T UVerse and also Comcast. So over a 10-year period, the franchise is over 10 years. So over a 10-year period, that's over $4 million for that city. Now, if it's been a while since I've been involved in buying a police car, but if it's on the state contract, we're probably looking at what, $40,000? And I guess with all the equipment associated with it, maybe higher. But that buys a lot of police cars over that period of time. And so we highly urge local governments to look at maximizing their franchise fee. The one other thing you may want to do, if you have not audited a cable company, your cable companies, I would highly recommend you do so. I guess over the last 5 years or 6 years through the GMA program, it's been close to $4 million that's been collected on behalf of cities and local governments for failure of companies to pay correctly under franchise fees. This city alone here earlier this year, Macon, recovered right at $300,000 from Cox Communications for their failure to pay correctly. Warner Robins was a little over $100,000. We also, I think it was a couple other cities in the area, Centerville, also recovered money from Cox. Yes, sir.
I hate to interrupt, but
Yep.
Probably a silly question here. But these cable companies that provide TV service, they also, a lot of them provide the internet service, but it's wired. Okay, it's coming in, using our right of ways, that kind of thing. And a lot of people are downsizing their video packages and watching a lot of things, Netflix and all that. It's coming through that.
Right.
And why is that exempt if they're still using our right of ways?
Okay. Yeah, good question. I won't call it a silly question, but it was a good question. Since 2002, the FCC initially ruled that the cable modem service before 2002, all local governments were paid franchise fees. The 5% fee applied to the cable modem service. But the FCC ruled that it was an information service, not a cable service. And that was taken all the way up to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court held in favor of the FCC's decision. So it's also been reinforced with the Congress passing the Internet Tax Freedom Act. You've got commerce. It says it's a violation of the Interstate Commerce Clause to charge fees associated with that service. So yes, I mean, it certainly looks like you would be paid on that because they're using your right of way. Now, the Uverse, AT&T Uverse, which offers video services through what they look at is more of a, they try to make the argument that's over the internet, where the courts ruled no, that looks like video, and it fell under the Cable Act, and so that's why AT&T Uverse does pay on video. But again, internet services, data, communication, voice over IP, that is all exempt. The order that Becky mentioned a few minutes ago that will go in effect in January, there's another order, I don't know if you mentioned this one, about the cable. There's a cable order out now where they're asking for comments. GMA will be filing comments that is very concerning in terms of the cable order. It's almost like the cable industry is seeing what is happening at the federal level with the wireless industry, where they're capping the fees at $270. But here, and as Becky said, it's cost-based is what the FCC is looking at. For the first time in like over 100 years, all the fees that local governments have charged for the use of right-of-way has been market-based. And now I'll give you an example. As I said, in 1984, they went from 3% to 5%. So you got Comcast, who got their start, I think, in the 60s in Tupelo, Mississippi, going door to door selling cable in Tupelo. Now look how large Comcast is today. But the argument we would make is 5% franchise fees never seem to hurt Comcast. It's never seemed to hurt or stymie their growth. And this is a company that's tried to have hostile bids to take over Disney, for goodness sakes. Here we have companies that have been paying a market-based fee for all these years, and now you've got the FCC looking at the wireless industry and telling local governments, oh no, you have to charge them on a cost-based formula, not market-based. But on the other hand, on the new FCC order they're looking at on cable, they are actually looking at cable having the capabilities of taking their whatever their market-based value is and letting them set the market-based value of free service to schools, free service to any city buildings. If you have a PEG channel, public education governmental access channel, they will be able to take the value of that channel and any fiber connection to make that live feed, to take and establish a market value of that, and then offset all those costs against your franchise fees. Unilaterally, just take that off the top on your franchise fee. So you have that coming down the pipe. But that kind of got me off a little bit to tell you about that, but I hope I answered your question.
Well, you did, and I think that early on, I would totally agree with the concept when you had a dial-up modem or the speeds were such that it is information. But now at 100 megabit per second, the kind of speeds that they're offering, videos are what they're doing. And they're watching videos, they're watching TV content. And
Well,
using our right of way.
yeah, one of the other complexities we have down the road with this is, again, this is expected to me getting a little bit over in the legislative area and speculation, but we got a major concern in that if the FCC is basically usurping local government's authority and saying, okay, we're going to set the rate that you can charge for use of that right of way from a fixed wireless carrier in the right of way that's doing small cell. They're basically saying that Charleston, South Carolina, you can charge no more than $270 for the use of the right of way compared to Ackerman, Mississippi. You've probably never heard of Ackerman, Mississippi, or Attapulgis, Georgia. You know, some of our smallest governments, and saying that, okay, Charleston or New York, you're able to, that's what you're going to charge, $270 versus these little towns, same fee. And so we've got the cable industry seeing the FCC take that type of action. And they're saying, how about us? We're paying 5% on gross. Why are we having to pay so much when that person that's using the small cell wireless on his modem or his laptop is able to download the Georgia Tech game and watch it right there instead of having to pay the cable operator to pay, at home, and he's having to pay a 5% fee. Our franchise fees are in jeopardy down the road if this continues on this slippery slope. And so that's a concern. But my presentation today is more about what we have and how you can utilize and work within those parameters. And so one of the things I want to talk about also about revenue from an audit on a cable operator is not only is it the financial piece, but under the Georgia law, if you're operating under a state franchise, you can go back 3 years to do that audit. And so like Macon, if they pick up $300,000 in the past, underpaid revenue, the nice thing to do is look at that going forward. That is new revenue going forward from those sources of revenue they were not paid on in the past, but now they'll be paid on this forevermore going forward. So that is a huge multiplier creating a revenue stream for our local government. There's another piece of the audit we highly recommend that we do is called jurisdictional coding, and that's to determine if the cable operator is indeed coding all the city addresses, city streets correctly in their billing system. A lot of times by human error, they may have entered into a wrong zip code or a wrong address, and they're paying the county government or paying an adjacent city, or vice versa. And it's just good business sense to get that cleared up every now and then. I mean, you do annexations. I need to remind you, if you do an annexation, make sure you notify the local cable operator, the telephone, electric, gas, all of them of that annexation. Send it to them by certified mail, return receipt requested. Keep the copy of that receipt in your files so that if you ever do an audit, you can show that you informed them of this annexation. And that can be a lot of increase money to you in terms of making sure that's done. If you need a form to do that, we can provide that to you. Ryan can send you that, and we can put it on the GMA website and just download that and modify it and use that when you notify people of annexations. I want to switch over to the Telecom Act. This doesn't affect county governments as much as what I just talked about with cable, but on the telecom, under the state law, basically you had telephone companies such as AT&T and others, which I would refer to as legacy providers. Before 2008, they were paying you 3%, generally paying most governments in Georgia, city governments, 3% franchise fee on telephone services that are being provided in the local community. That stayed intact. They should be paid on a quarterly basis. We still have some that are out there paying on an annual basis. If that's the case, you can easily tell them to change that to comply with the law. They should be paying you quarterly. So all your legacy telephone providers are continue to pay 3%. And then when you have a new telecommunications provider come into your community, they are required to submit to you an application that provides some basic information about who they are. You've got like 15 days, I believe it is, to respond whether the information's complete or not. And eventually, within 60 days, you can approve the petition. They don't act on it. So under state law, it's deemed approved. But just because the application's deemed approved doesn't mean you can look out your window and see that company out there digging up the street. They still have to get a permit from you. And they can't just go out and, you still have your police powers in place. You can't just have someone just go out and start working in your streets without authority from the local government. And although we have companies that seem to do that all the time. And so you need as Becky mentioned, GMA's got a really good model right-of-way permit ordinance. You can get that downloaded off the website. That is one of the things you really need to have in place, operating as a local government, permitting process. In most cases under the State Telecom Act and the Cable Act, permit fees are not allowed because they're in lieu of the franchise fees you would receive from the use of the right-of-way are in lieu of any permit fees. That doesn't apply to the small cell operators and other people trying to come into the right-of-way, but just on cable and telecom. So we look at our interpretation of the law is that the small cell operators are not subject to that same Telecom Act because that was written for wireline providers, not wireless. And that's our argument, and we're sticking to it for right now. But on the telecom, as I mentioned, legacy telephone providers that are providing retail and use service, they pay local governments 3% on a quarterly basis. The big piece of revenue that we're probably missing is the fiber that is being run through the town to generally say to be a wholesale provider, and that is where you've got a company, say like a company called Unity, or used to be Tower Cloud, running fiber through the town to serve a cell tower, running fiber to that cell tower to upgrade that cell tower to like a 4G network, give it the capacity they need. Now to get to 5G, you're going to see a lot more fiber being run to all these towers and in businesses. And so when they're running that fiber, I mean, they're not serving you and me, they're serving AT&T or Verizon. You've got these various fiber providers. They're serving service providers. So they're a wholesale provider. In that case, the state law states that a local government can charge the same amount. Actually, it doesn't say the local government can charge. It dictates to the provider that they are required to pay you the same that they would pay the state DOT. In the law, in the 2008 law that was passed, it actually prohibits you as a local government from requiring any franchise agreement from a telecom provider or into entering into any type of written agreement with a local telecom provider. You cannot do anything like that that would impede their ability to provide services. And the state goes on to say to those telecom providers, and remember, those are the folks that lobbied for this bill. It was not like GMA said, hey, we need this new bill. This was the telecom providers wanting this bill and to streamline their operations. And so the state said, well, you will also pay the local governments on this basis. And it didn't mean that you had to send them an invoice. They just had to pay you. And what do we find? We find now we're working with the state of Georgia DOT. We do have a tremendous amount of resources now showing fiber in every community in the state. And we're finding over and over where these companies have not paid the local governments. And in Macon alone, we just the other day, last week, had a company come back and say, okay, we owe you $45,000. We've got a case going on in Albany right now, a case in Peachtree Corners, where there's just tremendous amounts of fiber that's been in place, and the city hasn't, but these cities haven't been paid. My son actually, Becky shared with us a list of who was in attendance today and showed some cities that are represented here. Ryan's got a list over there of fiber that's in some of your cities. So before you leave, see Ryan, he can go over that list of fiber with you. What you need to do is take that list back home, look at your finance area, see, are you receiving fees from those companies? And the other thing you might want to do to validate what we're talking about is go back over the last 4 years, look at all the permits that you've issued over those 4 years to any company that's in your right of way, compare it to your finance. Have you been paid anything by those companies? If they haven't paid you, give us a call. They owe you money. To give you an example about Albany, we were doing a regional meeting in Albany earlier this month. And so we looked at the information we had. We saw a company called Unity had a lot of fiber in Albany. And so we went to the city's finance director and said, are you being paid by Unity? And they said, no, we're not. And we said, well, here's various streets they're on. And they said, well, we were paid by a company called Tower Cloud. And that was, but they abruptly stopped paying us in 2016. So I asked Ryan, I said, can you check to see when Unity acquired Tower Cloud? And he came back and said that they acquired them in 2016. So when you had a new company come in, they bought the company, they just stopped paying the fees. So, so now the city of Albany's charged them to get the money to them. We're probably looking at the city, we haven't seen the number yet, but we're estimating it's going to be 80,000 or more. So, but that's just one company. And so I'm telling you, there's an extensive amount of fiber that is in these communities where cities are not getting paid. And so that will be a focus of the program here in the next 12 months or 24 months. And but that completes, I think, on the telecom piece. Now we're going to kick over to, which will get the county governments back into the picture, will be utilization of county or city facility power leasing. As we mentioned about small cell, we're going to see tremendous numbers of small cell antennas, but we're also going to continue to see a lot of towers, a lot more antennas. There's hardly a day that goes by that we do not get a call on someone wanting to know more about how they can place antennas on city water tanks or county water tank towers. Mississippi yesterday, we had Collins, Mississippi saying, hey, we got someone wanting to erect a tower on our property. On the way here, Savannah's contacted us. And I'd like to start off a little conversation on any water tank tower. Generally, the proposal you initially receive from a company for the compensation for the use of your water tower is way low. Don't accept it. First one out of the box, don't accept it. It's low, I guarantee you. We have, I'll give you a quick example. City of Savannah, AT&T last year about this time offered the city $18,000 a year to use a water tank tower, which is located at the Savannah Hilton Head Airport, which is right by I-95. And they offered them $18,000. And the city, we worked with the city closely, and they gave me permission to, on the conference call, to kind of tease AT&T a little bit, or the representative with them, and say that we believe. And they said, how much does the city want? They said 72,000, not 18,000. And they said, and so my point on that is, as you all know, Savannah is one of our oldest cities in the nation, one of our largest in Georgia. You would think that the companies would have a general idea that Savannah probably has a few attorneys working for them and some consultants, but they still pitched Savannah the low ball of 18,000 by I-95. And there's a few cars that go up and down that road every day. And so, and that's why I'm telling you that you need to reject it. On a water tank tower, I don't care how small of a government you are or how remote area you are, you should be receiving no less than $2,000 a month for the use of a water tank tower. And directly you deal with their site locator. And if they offer you an initial offer and they say you're a small town, if they use the term, well, that's a good, you immediately need to hold on to your wallet when they use that terminology. You need to be able to say, well, what do you pay a big town? But out the window. You're looking at what is that provider looking at when he's coming to you for the use of that water tank tower space. It's close to a commercial center property is, and it's a little town in Maysville in North Georgia. Now, it's a small town, two highways, state highways running on either side of the water tank tower for the town for Verizon. Who knows? We might have left some money on the table, but it was still, I mean, that's a number that was far greater than what the little town was first approached with. Some other things to think about with water tank towers. Verizon's the other one I'd like to pick on with this. They will present you a document every time that will say in that lease, and don't just look at the money, but look at some of the other factors. They will actually put in that lease that if you ever have to paint that water tower, and you have to, or they'll rust, you have to paint the water tower or you have to repair it. Verizon say, well, if you ever have to do that, then we want to have the city pay for us to remove our equipment. We take a big red pen, strike through that. And I can tell you, of all the times we've helped local governments with that issue, never once have they pushed back on that. But if they can think about it from a national perspective, if they're negotiating with 20,000 cities for 20,000 water tank towers, if they can get that provision in for 10,000, they've made a lot of money. And their lawyers will enforce that provision. So be careful about that. And they generally put language in there which is not enforceable. They'll say, for the local government will have to indemnify them. You're prohibited from indemnifying a private user local property. So we always strike those out. There's one thing, Becky, I forgot. I wanted to back up just real quick on that cable audit I mentioned. There was a spreadsheet that we had in the file or the presentation. I don't know if we have that. Where we could say for them to take that home. This is it, when your cable company pays you, you should be paid quarterly. That one is complete. That's correct. All the sources of revenue you see on that sheet is correct. And so you take that sheet home, you compare it to what you're receiving. If you're missing some of those revenue sources, then you've got a problem. Okay, and that means they're underpaying you, and so they should be paying you home shopping commissions. Every time someone buys something on a home shopping channel, the cable operator gets a commission. Well, you should be getting 5% of that commission. Again, it goes back to gross revenue. So I just thought of that as I'm talking. I didn't bring my notes with me today to cheat. So, but back to the water tank towers. The other thing is when they'll do a structural analysis to determine how many antennas. Ask that question first. How many antennas are you planning on putting on our water tank tower? How much land space are you going to use? They will do a structural analysis for you. They will show, here's an engineer signing off saying that the water tank tower can hold this capacity. If you don't feel comfortable with that and you want your own engineer to sign off on that, fine. Just have them pay for your engineer to do that. You shouldn't have to be paying for that. Say the amount of time, but on land leases, I want to make sure I leave you with this thought. Is if you were driving here today and you were going back home, you look on the I-75 or I-16, look at on the side of the road, you're going to see these towers, 250-foot towers, and they're going to generally see them loaded down with antennas, numerous antennas. Well, that's, you may have a company like Crown Castle or American Tower that may own that tower, but they have erect a tower. They put in there a proposal to pay a monthly rent for the use of your land. Again, remember what I told you, they're going to give you a low proposal. on that initially. But you will not see in their proposal rent sharing or revenue sharing. But you want to basically hand them back that document and say, if you're going to build a tower on our public land, in addition to the monthly 30 or 40% of their revenue of the rent they're charging, I mean, they can really put on a pretty good Oscar-winning performance to tell you they don't do that. I feel strongly enough about this recommendation to tell you that you tell them if they don't agree to that, then they need to walk. They need to go somewhere else. They're not 2% annual inflation rate. They're going to try to get you down on that. If you come to overhead, you can't come to, okay, if you're not going to give us the 3%, use someone like us. What we do is say to the operator, we put it in the agreement, expertise. So if they want to use public property, a fee that you should have reimbursed to you. I'm going to talk a little bit, covered, I think, some hybrid tank tower and the land lease. We'll say there's 6 months, they'll pester you to death, saying that, hey, we want to call and see if you'll accept 15,000. That's just 15,000, 10,000, a small check to extend that bridge. We're just telling you. And the closer you get to the expiration of that lease, the more valuable that lease becomes. So don't let them extend out a lease. And they're usually trying to get you to extend a lease that was already heavily in their favor in the first place. You don't want to extend a poor lease. The other thing they try to do is then just buy out your lease. If they can't get you to extend it, they'll just say, well, we'll try to buy out your lease. Ryan gets the call. That's one of the great things of being the boss. You can get to give them all the things you don't like to do. And so Ryan has to put up with companies that call all the time, call cities to buy out the leases. One's called Landmark Dividend. They call us literally every day or send us a letter. Ryan had a good email with them the other day and told them, we generally do not recommend to any city or local government to sell out their lease. And it just doesn't make any monetary sense. And they actually put in writing back to us, we agree with you. It doesn't make any sense. But every now and then, a local government is in a budget crunch and they may need to monetize their lease. Well, shoot. You're better off going to GMA's lease pool program to borrow money from that or borrow money from a bank rather than selling that lease. And for pennies on the dollar, usually 50 cents or less on the dollar. And then all you have to do is look at their proposal, do the math on the number of years you got left on that lease, and you'll see they're only offering you 50 cents on the dollar. And but they're banking that you're a city government or a county government that might be having some cash flow problems, hoping that you'll bite. And apparently a lot of people are biting because they keep calling. And so I hope when we do these presentations, it'll help you with that. Then we have another lovely group called MD7 out of San Diego. They usually work for AT&T. And they call local governments, not just local governments, they call farmers, anybody that owns land, that leases property, or if a city with a water tank tower, they will call and say things like, there's mergers and acquisitions going on, there's new technologies, and if you don't agree to lower your rent, AT&T may go somewhere else. And also, we also want you to agree to extend the lease 20, 30 years, and also amend the document to, I'm not kidding you, they have all this in there, to say that we give AT&T carte blanche authority to use as much space on your water tank tower and public land as they need for the next 30 years without ever having to pay the public another nickel. And they want that in an agreement. We always kick that back to them if we even bother to talk to these guys. We kick it back to them and say, if you can show us where AT&T's ever agreed to a deal like that for their property, we'll be glad to talk to them. And of course, there's no way that AT&T is going to let somebody use their property for the next 30 years without ever having to compensate them any additional money and let you just use as much space on it as you want. But Anyway, I can tell you it's a bluff, and we've never seen one leave. And as I said, you're going to see so many more antennas, so many more towers coming. And think about it, for them to leave, how disruptive that would be for them to leave that spot. They got to go somewhere else. The cost is tremendous to make that change. And so it's a little insulting to me that local governments have to put up with that. They, you want to say to them in the first place, as a privilege, we allowed you to be here in the first place. But we're not going to take this harassment. If you continue this, you can just leave. And so that's our recommendation to cities. Don't be intimidated by that whatsoever. We had City of Statesboro had 2 water tank towers. They've got more than that, but on this particular case, this company came to us and said, well, the city's been paid $36,000 a year on each water tank tower. They said, if you'll go down to 34, AT&T will stay. If not, they're going to leave. And so we saw that the leases were going to expire in 2 years. So we basically responded to them and say, thank you for contacting us. And we see that the leases are going to expire 2 years. So we reject your offer, and we now want $48,000 on each water tank tower. Well, long story short, AT&T's now paying Statesboro for both water tank towers $48,000, and they also reimbursed them for GMA's fee. So, so it was good that they called. So and that is what I would highly recommend to you. Do not respond to those kind of letters. And then, let's see, on small cell, we have, as Becky said, highly recommended to you that even though we've got the FCC's actions bearing down on us, we've been able to negotiate agreements that, we've been dealing with this small cells for about 3 years. And as Becky said, we've worked through a lot of agreements with companies. We just had AT&T agree to a small cell agreement in Athens. There also seems to be a common denominator about where small cells go outside of Atlanta, and even in Atlanta. Common denominator where the small cells initially seem to go, and that means each one of these communities has a football stadium. Where there's large congregations of people, that's where they want to be with small cell. I mean, it's like a Wi-Fi booster in your home. It's boosting that signal off the big towers. And again, down the road, the Internet of Things, the autonomous driving cars that we hear about, all of that's going to work off a small cell. And so our country is interesting, what just played up, I saw in the Wall Street Journal the other day, is being couched as a race between us and China to see who gets the 5G first. And I think the industry's taken liberty with that to tell our congressmen and the FCC, well, we could win that race if we can get all our local governments out of the way, because they're an impediment to our being able to beat China. And that's a shame that it's being pitched that way, like you're an impediment, when most of our local governments haven't even seen small cell. Again, if you have a football stadium, you're more apt to have seen it. But as Charlotte pointed out, Atlanta seems to process their applications pretty well. But generally, we've been getting City of Savannah did this years ago, 3 years ago, all along Water Street or River Street. They have, I want to say it's about 30-something small cell facilities, and they're paying the City of Savannah about $1,300 per site. So to give you an indication of what we're facing, matter of fact, I have a conference call with Savannah on Tuesday. They want to know what's the impact to them of this legislation or the FCC order. Well, right off the bat, I got to tell them, well, you're facing going from $1,300 a site down to $270. One part I understand from the order, it's my understanding, Becky, and correct me if I'm wrong, they're not grandfathering any of these agreements in, so they could impact the existing agreements we have and whatever state legislation is already in place. So, but I'm not going to dwell a lot on small cell, but just to say that generally we around the state DOT charges $900 per site. They don't allow, actually, incidentally, they don't allow the installation of any new poles in the state right away for small cell. They encourage the companies to co-locate on the existing, like Georgia Power pole. It's difficult for them, though, these companies to locate on an electric pole because they want to be up in the top of the pole, and that's where the electric space is, and it's too dangerous to be up there. So Georgia Power will allow them to go on a secondary pole, but not a primary distribution pole. And so consequently, what you're going to see in our communities now is a much more proliferation of these small cells as they come in. You're going to have Verizon wanting to put in, say, a dozen small cell facilities, and AT&T's wanting to have their dozen put in, and they're not co-locating on their own poles together, like they do on these 250-foot cell towers. We've got Crown Castle, which is the big owner of the cell towers. They do have a small cell pole out there that looks like a street lamp. It's a very good-looking pole that will accommodate at least 2 carriers. And they're trying to work with the industry to encourage them to go in that direction. So far, they've said they haven't had any takers on it yet. But we're hoping that it will evolve to that. To echo what Becky said, it's important to have your right-of-way ordinance in place because you're going to have these 90-day shot clocks on a new pole. There will be the 60-day co-location, but it's the things you're going to be really concerned about, I think, more than likely is the installation of where those new poles go. If you're coming up to a site that they're proposing that's just bad, that you do not want. I mean, we had one in Dahlonega, where I live. If you're familiar with the Smith House or Dahlonega, that's where Mobility wanted to place their 120-foot pole, was right in front of the Smith House. Well, you can imagine how that would have went over. But so if you have something in the future like that with a 50 or 60-foot pole where they're wanting to install in a place in a historic district or someplace that you do not want that pole, it'll be to your benefit to get on that quickly. Don't wait to the 85th day to respond. You need to probably get an engineer involved, and we do have access to some engineers we can refer to you. And they're radio frequency engineers. They'll come in and look at all the sites to see if there's alternative sites where that will work. And then you can mandate they go in that area and not on the place where you don't want them to be. So I wouldn't despair over that. I mean, we do have the resources to move, to help on that if need be. Okay.
Did you say DOT has said that they can't, they're not letting them put in new small cells?
That's correct. They don't allow them to install new poles in the state right away. I think if the state DOT was here, they would probably say to me, well, we don't like to use the language that I'm using, saying none at all. But they highly discourage any installation of new poles in the state right away. Only allow them to co-locate on the existing poles that are there. And when you think about it, generally the state right away, in a lot of places, it's more high speed. From a safety standpoint, they don't want these crews out there working in that state right away. Cities, we're a little more flexibility. We have city streets. We have the ability to allow a little more installation of new poles. But again, cities, they don't want to see a proliferation of a ton of poles in their downtown. So it's a conundrum, and we're all going to have to work through it. But it's disturbing when the federal government, through appointed officials, try to usurp local government authority. It's been in place for over 100 years. If anything, it should be processed through an elected body like Congress, I would think. And I think that's what GMA is pushing is that they overstepping their authority. I think that's what the lawsuits are going to be aimed at. Let's see, moving on. We also, I want to mention briefly other areas of the right of way. We have local governments here, county governments doing 911 collections. That's going to go over to be the responsibility of the state. They will collect those fees starting January, and they will distribute those monies back to the local governments on a monthly basis starting in January. One of the things we have recently started providing local governments is the ability to audit the 911 fees. And the results we're seeing so far have been tremendous in terms of that it has been beneficial to the local governments in terms of uncovering underpayments and mistakes. We've had recently for the city of Alpharetta, we have about, I want to say 30 cities that collect their own 911 fees. Most of the counties do. if not all of them. But like Alpharetta recovered over 200,000, Smyrna just over 100,000, and again, a lot of the local governments, the 911 fees have not been paying for the cost of the services. So what I would highly recommend, you may want to contact GMA to look at doing an audit, because before, even if it goes over to the state in 2019, you still have the ability to look back 3 years, and you got a statute of limitations. The more you wait to do it, ability this between now and in the calendar year 2019 for sure, and they'll take a look at it. What we can do at no cost to you is at least look at your remittances and say, does it look like everything's in order? And when you're doing an audit like this, you're not doing it with just one company. There's usually about 20 companies that should be paying you 911 fees. And so and then we've also recently realized that we have numerous city governments that have not been paid franchise fees from the EMCs. They don't have franchise agreements in with electric membership co-ops. We recently helped the city of Fitzgerald get a franchise agreement in with Irwin EMC. We have now one, we're working with Badea, working with Cleveland, with Habersham in Cleveland. Interestingly, we've also found that, over the years, I guess Georgia Power with their agreements are usually about 30 years in term. And I think for all these years, unless someone's here that can tell me differently, Georgia Power has paid on an annual basis instead of quarterly. And so we have the EMC. So we now are trying to push these companies. We're going to be working with Decatur, with Georgia Power. We want to try to push these companies to pay cities on a quarterly basis. We did have Habersham EMC just agreed to do so in Cleveland. And so if I would think that you would want to have a better cash flow on that and quicker money coming to you. But if you like the annual payment, you can certainly keep that. But as we're trying to move to that as well. So if you are served by an EMC, you're not getting paid, don't have a franchise in place, we can help on that as well. I think, Ryan, have I covered everything? Okay, I will be glad to try to answer any questions, and if anyone has. Yes, sir.
When are franchise fees supposed to be paid? Are they all paid at the time, or does it vary by company?
Well, on a cable company under a state franchise, they'll be paid quarterly. And I don't know of any company outside of Comcast that's not operating under a state franchise. There could be some mom and pop local cable company I'm not aware of that may be paying under a local franchise, but the fiber run, probably didn't go enough into that, but if you're in the metro area, the state DOT rate is $5,000 a mile annually. Now that's paid annually. The rural areas, it drops down to $2,000 a mile, and then to the most very rural area, like I mentioned, out of Polgus, someplace like that would be $1,000. Register Georgia recently was $1,000. A company running fiber through them to get to Statesboro, and so that's paid annually. Also want to caution you on those that pay annually on the fiber runs. You don't want to get too used to that money, because I'll give you a quick example. Valdosta had 20 miles of fiber from a company called Tower Cloud, has now been purchased by Unity. They were paying the city $100,000 a year, 5,000 times 20. And $100,000 a year, had been paying that for a few years. And then the company came up and said, okay, we now have one retail end user. And so we're only, under the state law, they're only required to pay 3% on that retail end user. And it's interesting, in the state law, it doesn't mean whichever is the greater. It's just if you have one retail end use customer, you pay 3%. And you could have tons and runs and miles of fiber, and you would not be paid on that basis. But cable telecom is quarterly. We do see power and gas is usually paid annually. But we're trying to change that, trying to go to quarterly across the board. Anything else?
We've been recently approached by a solar company
Oh. A little bit. We've worked with the city of Columbus with a solar company, and using again public land. And you know, I'm trying to remember how we based the rent. It was based on, I think, a per cents on the kilowatt hours they sell. And I believe Fitzgerald may have that, and I think Valdosta has a solar farm. You know, Lions was just we actually got an email from DOT yesterday saying they are going to adopt some amendments to their utility accommodation policy manual that will include wind and solar. They're addressing that now. So we can anticipate a lot more solar energy use in our state, and I think you're going to see a lot of them approaching local governments for that. So that's an area we need to get up to speed on pretty quick. And again, I want to say, I was telling Becky, we work very closely with GDOT. And if you think about it, it makes perfect sense because in any city, intertwined in the city is state right of way. So we're working in tandem with right of way for local government as well as in the state. So we coordinate with the state the use of those rights of ways. Oh, I'm sorry. If I can remember them. Did y'all hear about the solar? Okay. Okay, was there another question, sir?
What happens if that right of way that you have fiber running through in your city is a interstate highway right of way also?
You know, I don't know. That's federal right of way, and there is, you know, I need to ask the state DOT that question. I'm not that familiar with that. And, but I will tell you this, one thing that prompted us working with the DOT right here recently is there is a tremendous amount of long-haul fiber throughout the state. And give you a quick little example, it wasn't in Georgia, but it was right across the border. Phoenix City, Alabama, you know, right across the river from Columbus. They were doing an $8 million streetscape project. And they were frustrated. They contacted me and said, you know, we need help. We got Alabama Power, they still won't take down their poles and in this area so we can finish the project. And they said, but Alabama Power is telling us there's one company that's got the wire up there, and it's called Zayo. And they were saying, we don't know anything about Zayo. We've never given them a permit. We've never issued a franchise. So Ryan does a lot of work with Zayo, so we had him contact Zayo to say, you know, you better get your wire down or it's going to be taken down by the city, or you got to enter into a franchise. So long story short, we got it done. But we found out through that process, Zayo was running fiber all the way through Georgia, all the way to Texas. And I mean, that's when you're talking about long haul fiber, that's long haul fiber. But the reason when we see all this long haul fiber, so my question becomes is we want to make sure, again, we're charged in the state law on wholesale providers that we cannot charge any more than what the state charges. So we went to the state and asked them, can you let us know who's the long haul fiber providers are and what do you charge? And or are you charging them? They came back, gave us all the information. So we now know who those long haul fiber providers are. We know where they're being charged. So we're going to go back to the governments where we see long haul fiber going to your community, ask if you permitted them to use any part of the city right away. And if they have and they haven't paid you, they need to pay. Because it'll be, again, it's in compliance with state law. They're bringing them in line with paying with what they should have been paying all along. Anyone else? Okay, well, thank you very much.
Greg, I want to thank you and Ryan and Tim Kachik. Thank you both. Thank you all for being here. We've covered a lot of information and we're finished up ahead of schedule, but I want to also extend our appreciation on behalf of GMA and ACCG for y'all being here this afternoon. Thanks for taking the time. We hope the material has been interesting and informative. We will make the presentation available on the GMA website. including the presentations. And then I'll also email, if you were pre-registered for this, I can email the content that we covered today out to you later this evening. So thanks again. If there are no other questions or any other business to cover, then we'll be adjourned. Thank you.